Isang mapagpala at makasaysayang araw sa lahat. I'm Jubes Nieves, a history researcher from the National Historical Commission of the Philippines and a member of the National Quincentennial Committee Secretariat. In this episode, we will be joined by Ms. Geneva Urizar, Museum Guide of Museo ni Apolinario Mabini at PUP. Ngayong araw ay ginugunita ng sambayan ng Pilipino ang ika-156 na anibersaryo ng kapanganakan ni Apolinario Mabini o Kapule. Welcome to the Countdown to 500 Years, a special program brought to you by the Office of the President of the Philippines and the National Quincentennial Committee in anticipation of the 2021 Quincentennial Commemorations in the Philippines. This is a series of online lectures which aims to sustain the Filipinos' interest to the 500th anniversary of the victory at Mactan, the Philippine part in the first circumnavigation of the world, and other related events in 2021 in this time of COVID-19 pandemic. Lubos kaming nagpapasalamat sa mga sumusubaybay ngayon, gayon din sa mga katuwang na ahensya na kaagapay namin upang maisakutuparan ang programang ito. Ang National Historical Commission of the Philippines, Presidential Communications Operations Office, Radio-Television Malacañang, Department of Foreign Affairs, Museo ni Apolinario Mabini-PUP, at Museo Apolinario Mabini-Tanauan, Batangas. We are live via Facebook pages of National Quincentennial Committee, NHCP, PCOO, RTVM, NCCA, and DFA. We are also live via Facebook pages of Museo ni Apolinario Mabini-PUP at Museo ni Apolinario Mabini-Tanauan, Batangas. Please don't forget to share this live stream to your friends and like our Facebook page, National Quincentennial Committee, Republic of the Philippines. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram, NQC 2021, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel, National Quincentennial Committee, for more educational materials. Follow also our playlist on Spotify, The 500 Years Philippines, to access the official soundtrack of the Quincentennial Commemorations. Dito sa ikatlong Countdown to 500 online lecture live, itatampok natin ang adhikain ni Apolinario Mabini na itaas ang pagnanasa ng mga Pilipino, sandaang taong mahigit na ang nakalilipas, na naging malaya at nagsasarili bilang simula ng paglaya ng mga matagal nang inaaping mga lahing Malay o Malayo tulad ng mga nasa Indonesia na dating sakop ng mga Olandes o Dutch, mga Malaysians, Bruneians at Singaporeans na sakop naman ng mga Briton. Nakakatuwang isipin na dito sa ating bayan, nagningas ang apoy ng kalayaan na pati kay Mabini, ito ang liwanag na dapat damhin ng mga kalahi natin upang bumangon at maibalik ang matandang kalayaan. Gayun din, ang ating mga bayani ang nagtatag ng unang demokrasya at modernong republika, kaya't nararapat lamang nating ipagbunyi ang narating nating ito bilang bansa. Sa unang naging lektura noong 12 ng Hunyo, itinampok ni Dr. Vic Torres ng De La Salle University papaanong naging isa sa mga inspirasyon si Lapu-lapu at ang Mactan ng panahon ni Mabini para lumaya sa mga Kastila. Sa ikalawang lektura naman ni Dr. Kirby Alvarez ng UP Diliman, tinalakay naman niya papaano binawi ni Rizal at ng kanyang henerasyon ang alaala na mayroon tayo tungkol sa ating mga ninuno na nooy minamaliit na mga mananakop. Kaya tuloy, ang tingin natin sa ating sarili ay maliit at mababa. Sa mga may tanong po, feel free to ask questions through the comment section of this live stream and we will accommodate them at the latter part of the lecture. Now, in behalf of the Museo ni Apolinario Mabini-Tanauan Senior Curator Olga Palakay, let me read her welcome remarks. Pinagpalang umaga po sa ating lahat. Ako po si Ginang Olga R. Palakay, ang Senior Shrine Curator ng Museo ni Apolinario Mabini-Tanauan, lungsod ng Tanauan, Batangas. Ngayong araw pong ito ay ika-156 na taong kapanganakan ni Apolinario Mabini, ang utak ng himagsikan, dakilang lungpo, unang kalihim ng usaping panlabas at tagapayo ni Pangulong Emilio Aguinaldo noong panahon ng himagsikan. Kanina pong alas 8 ng umaga, nagkaroon ng payak na paggunita ng kanyang kapanganakan dito sa kanyang museo at kung saan din po siya isinilang dito sa Barangay Talaga, Tanauan. Nagkaroon ng pagtataas ng watawat at pag-aali ng bulaklak sa kanyang puntod na dinaluhan ng ilang piling panauhin mula sa lungsod ng Tanawan at kaanak ng ating bayani. Bagamat ang mga museo ng Pambansang Komisyong Pangkasaysayan ng Pilipinas ay pansamantalang sarado dulot ng pandemiko, hindi natatapos dito ang ating pagbabahagi ng kaalaman tungkol sa kasaysayan, kultura, at iba pa sa pamamagitan ng mga online lecture, exhibits at marami pang iba. Ngayon pong umaga, ito ay mayroong lektura tungkol kay Apolinario Mabini sa pangangasiwa ng NQC. Mabuhay po tayong lahat at salamat sa lahat ng mga frontliners. Upang ipakilala naman ang ating guest lecturer, akin pong tinatawagan si Binibining Orizar.
Morning. So our speaker for today is an assistant professor at the Department of Social Sciences, College of Arts and Social Sciences, University of the Philippines, Los Baños. She finished Bachelor of Arts in History cum laude in the year 2000 and finally Masters of Arts in Asian Studies in the year 2006 in UP Diliman. In 2009, the Philippine Society for Study of Nature, or PSSN, awarded her third place, Best Research Paper in Social Sciences. Her research interests are deportados. These are includes with deportados, colonial medicine, ethnic conflict management, border disputes, foreign relationships, World War II Philippines, senior citizens, Southeast Asia, military and diplomatic history, and the last is film and media history. Everyone, please welcome our speaker for today. Her name is Dr. April Hope P. Castro.
Magandang umaga po sa lahat. Ako po si Dr. April Hope Castro. Ako po ang magsasalita ngayong umaga para sa paksang Mabini and Malay Freedom. Simulan ko na bang lecture? Mabini and the Malay Freedom. I will start my lecture with the quote from Rafael Palma on Apolinario Mabini. He penned this statement in his essay entitled The Warrior, the Patriot. Rafael Palma said that to the men of the sword and of action will always belong the enthusiastic approach and acclamation of the masses. But it is to the idealistic men of the pen that the final reverence is accorded, the eternal gratitude of the people. But because of the rare contrast in the human spirit, while deeds are quickly forgotten, ideas remain permanent. They inspire and guide, and despite the passing of time and generations. Rafael Palma noted that there is no other hero that has the greatest right to the pedestal of glory than Apolinario Mabini when we talk about the history of the Philippine Revolution, because it was Mabini who inspired courage and determination amongst the Filipino people during the turbulent times of the Philippine Revolution, and in the end has also gained the respect and admiration of the enemies. It was not because he fought by his arms, but rather he fought by his pen. So in that case, this lecture aims to present the political thoughts of Apolinario Mabini, about his aspirations for an independent Philippines that is organically free from the reins of colonialism and its eventual role as the bearer of freedom for the entire Malay entity. To further illuminate the topic, the Mabini and the Malay freedom, I have divided the discussion into two major parts. First, we have to know how the concept of Malayness was figured in our history as a constituting element of Filipino identity. Number two, the second part would be to address Mabini's teleological conception of our history as a people relative to the circumstances of his time. Now, to start with, how did Malayness was figured in the Philippine context? First and foremost, we are going to trace it back to the time of the Spanish chroniclers when they first encountered the Filipinos or the natives of the Philippines. Antonio Pigafetta in 1521 Antonio Pigafetta in 1521, an Italian chronicler who joined Magellan's voyage, described, for instance, the ceremony establishing friendship between Ferdinand Magellan and the King of Limassol as a Malay rite. Incidentally, it was also Pigafetta who provided a list of 426 Malay words corresponding to items that they encountered in their voyages to the Philippines and later on in Maluco. That was in 1521. The first reference to Malay in the Philippine context. The second one, we can find it in Juan de Plasencia in 1589, when Juan de Plasencia referred to Tagalog as being classed among the Malay nations. And another one is Antonio de Morga, who wrote the Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas in the 1600s, claimed that there is no doubt that the inhabitants of Manila and the surrounding communities of Manila are of the Malayan race. Now, Ignacio Alsina, who wrote about largely about the Visayas, in 1668, claimed that there is no doubt that the Visayans, are the descendants of the Malaysians because of the connection of the languages between the Visayan language as well as the other language of the Malay, of our neighboring Malay states. Now, as we go through, before the total colonization of the Spaniards of the Philippines, we went back to the time when the Philippines, the connection of the Philippines to a greater Malayan entity. So the Philippines was at the heart of the greater China and Malay trading network. Being at the heart of that network, we have Laguna copper plate inscription as a very notable evidence of our participation not just participation, but our connection to the Malay, to the greater Malay geographical entity. So the Laguna copper plate inscription, we all know that there is great significance, about our being part of the Malay world with the finding of the Laguna copper plate inscription way back in 1989. So because this plate was a testament of our interaction to the great Malay entity to as early as 900 AD. Written in a mix of Old Malay, Old Japanese, and Old Tagalog, this inscription appears to be a legal document that absolves a particular individual and his descendants of the financial obligation to another. With striking resemblance of copper inscriptions found in Java and Sumatra, experts had initially thought that this brought it from the outside. But recent developments, or upon closer examination, many scholars now believe that it was likely to have been locally produced. So we have several conferences here in Laguna before about the Laguna copper plate inscription, and it was one of the most dedicated topic of Theo Salazar when he talks about the Malayan connection. Now, as Spanish colonization became deep or entrenched in the Philippines, somehow we lost or we were cut off from our ties with the Malay, with the greater Malay entity. But with the advent of the 19th century, uh, with the presence of the illustrados of the 19th century, the consciousness, the Malay consciousness that we are part of the Malay race became one of the battle cries of the 19th century illustrados to combat the degrading description of some Spaniards and other Europeans about our civilization as Filipinos. So this 19th century illustrados who wrote about our being Malay and our connection with a larger Malay entity are the following. First, we have Pedro Paterno, Trinidad Pardo de Tavera, Jose Rizal, and finally, politically, Apolinario Mabini. So I'm going to start with Pedro Paterno. With Pedro Paterno in 1887, in his book Antigua Civilización Tagalog, or the Tagalog Ancient Civilization, Pedro Paterno provided an evolutionary framework that located what he called Tagalog civilization among the world's greatest civilization. Maligned by fellow scholars of his and our time for his fantastic, illusory, and overblown claims, Paterno's effort was nonetheless a notable early attempt to write the Philippines in world history. He imploded the beginning of Tagalog civilization with the arrival of the Malays, followed by the foreigners such as Chinese, Arabs, and the Spaniards. What is notable here is that there is that concept of Malay in the Philippines. Another one is Trinidad Pardo H. Pardo de Tavera. He was a medical doctor by profession, but he is a prolific writer as well. He claimed the distinction for probably being the first Filipino to have formal training in Malay language. While in France, he studied Malay under the pioneering scholar Pierre Faber of the École Nationale des Langues Orientales Vivantes. He also studied Sanskrit and produced some works lauded by experts in the field. Another noteworthy propagandist who also elevated the Malayness in the context of the Philippines was Isabelo de los Reyes. Okay, this man is homegrown. He did not study abroad. But what is interesting about Isabelo de los Reyes is that he anticipated the view expressed by the later Filipino scholars such as Hocano in 1965 and 1975 as to the dubiousness of the category Indonesianos, a popular ethnographic entity then. He also wondered about the possibility that rather than Filipinos originating from Malays from Sumatra, another commonly accepted supposition, perhaps the reverse was more likely, that the Malays in Sumatra came from the Philippines. The next one, of course, was the brilliant Jose Rizal. Most of us know that Jose Rizal had always elevated or had always referred to the Filipinos belonging to a great race, the great Malayan race. So in one of his famous essays, he described the natives of the country as Malayan Filipinos, who, like other Malays, were a sensitive yet resilient people. He said, to quote, "The Philippine races, like all the Malays, do not succumb before the foreigner, like the Australians, the Polynesians, and the Indians of the New World. That is, despite the new diseases that the European colonizers had brought and the oppression and brutalization they inflicted on local people, the Malayan Filipinos, like other Malays, had not been exterminated. They rather continued to increase in number and emerge from the experience tougher than before." While very much cognizant of the Filipino affinity to the Malay race, Rizal expressed a critical attitude toward the nature of such affinity. But it is all about the similarities between the customs and the Sumatrans and the Filipinos in relation to what Isabelo de los Reyes had said, that the Filipinos came from Sumatra. So Rizal cast doubt on that claim by Isabelo de los Reyes, but of course they are together in believing that we are part of a greater Malayan race. They did this they did this to counter the narratives of the Europeans as to this particular area of the world is not a civilized one. So Now, the last of the 19th century illustrados, I am going to include Apolinario Mabini as a 19th century illustrado, even if he is at the further end of the 19th century. It was Apolinario Mabini who who verbalized how are we going to connect with the Greater Malay entity politically. So in the 1900s, when he was in Guam, in his essay, ¿Cuál la verdadera misión de la revolución? Or what is the most important mission of the revolution? He said that the Philippines was a country that is ready to govern itself, and that in due time, not only it is ready for self-governance, but the Malay peoples, including the Philippines, were ready to form a confederation of Asian states. It was Apolinario Mabini who verbalized politically how are we going to connect with our with the Greater Malay entity for further cooperation against the colonizers. Now, with that note, I am now going to discuss about Apolinario Mabini's concept of the Malay freedom. But first, let me start with his political philosophy. As a political thinker, Mabini established the importance the importance of the relationship of these three items: the individual, the society, and the government. Although Mabini has a lot of political writings, it was hard to It was hard to read Mabini or the works of Mabini in one sitting, because his political thoughts are scattered, okay, in all of his letters as well as the political writings. But eventually, because of his La Revolución Filipina, the greatest obra maestra, opus of Apolinario Mabini, one can not comprehend, but rather summarize his political philosophy. And Cesar Mahul had the summary of the political philosophy of Mabini. He said, since individuals are the basic elements in all social I'm sorry, I have two laptops. I cannot see the entire screen because of the Zoom what do you call this one, film at the right side of my screen, so I have to use my other laptop. So since may I continue now? Cesar Adib Mahul summarized the political philosophy of Mabini pertaining to the intricate relationship between the individual, the society, and the government. He said, since individuals are the basic elements in all social and political problems, Mabini dealt extensively with the conception of man, both as an individual and as an element of society. Assuming the existence of natural law, Mabini evaluated what the individual and society aimed at, as well as a social function of government. It was on the basis of what he thought to constitute the relations between the individual, society, and government that he built the theory of and justification for a revolution. This particular statement is quite dangerous and sensitive, but this is the foundation of the concept of Malay freedom for Mabini. But let us contextualize our discussion from here on that the revolution Mabini was referring to, it was encased in the period that he belongs, the turbulent period of the revolution, the period from the Spanish colonization to that of American occupation. So to further elucidate that particular concept, Mabini has these statements about the individual. So man as a creature of God possessed inalienable rights called the natural rights based on natural law. So therefore, man has the inalienable right to be free, to be independent. So one of the related concepts of independence is his duty to preserve life. Thus, anyone who prevented a man from preserving his life violates the right of the latter to life. The transgressor violates the natural liberty of the other. So whoever that will impede the development of one person towards the natural tendency for development violates the innate right of that individual. So again, I am going to reiterate here that since liberty is related to natural law and the demands of rationality, it was incompatible to evil. So to preserve life, to pursue personal development, progress is innate to natural law. That is fundamental to natural law. Whatever hinders that, it is evil. But as man, as an individual, you have the inalienable right to be free. Okay, so liberty is incompatible to evil. Whatever stifles that liberty is evil for Mabini. So, and in his letter to a Los Revolucionarios, Apolinario Mabini elucidated this further. You can find this in the La Revolución Filipina. He said, or he addressed to his comrades in that letter, and keep this in mind, dear comrades. March along the narrow road of honor and virtue, because it is only along this path that we will find true freedom, since this road only leads to good and never to evil. Further, Mabini said that even if some of you will give up your life for the greater ideal, it is never a lost cause, because it is towards the path of good. Okay. Now, next is society. So individual, he said that as an individual, you cannot attain your highest possible well-being if you don't belong to a society. So society for Mabini should be mutual help, so that each could enjoy the highest possible well-being. A situation that well-being, that highest possible well-being, is a situation that can never be arrived at by the sole efforts of an individual without the aid of others. You can also find this in Jose Rizal's La Liga Filipina. And you can also find this statement of Rizal in the Ordenanzas de la Revolución, as well as in the El Verdadero Decálogo, that mutual help is essential in order to achieve the highest possible well-being for every Filipino. However, society or social situations could also enable deceit and usurpation. So in that case, when the society violates the natural rights of the individual that I have discussed a while ago, the individual is violated. So it is natural for the individual to fight for, or to fight in order to regain what is natural. So in the context of the Philippine Revolution, okay, Mabini saw that colonization, exploitation by the colonizers are the fundamental evils of his society during his time. So it dawned on me right now, how about in our time? What are the fundamental evils in our society that we have to fight against in order to regain our natural rights as an individual? Anyhow, so, and then the government. So institution of government is imperative to ensure and protect the natural rights of the individual. That is the main function of the government. So essentially, it is to do away with evil, to ensure that the individuals are free and are pushed towards progress. Now, the social contract. Between the individual and the government. The government, according to Mabini, has to guarantee their citizens the highest number of personal security, the greatest number of rights, the maximum satisfaction of economic wants, and the best possible education. So those are the only things that Mabini has stipulated in his La Revolución Filipina. But he also said that as the government has an obligation to its citizens, its citizens also have its obligation to the government. The government the citizens has to be law-abiding, obedient to authority, virtuous for that matter, and eminently patriotic. However, when a breach of the social contract happens, like this, as Mahul summarizes Mabini, he said that, or Mabini explained, noted, or stated that, in this statement, it's Mahul summarizing Mabini. The moment the government fails in its fundamental purposes, as when it favors a special segment in society or it violates the rights of the individuals, it forfeits the claim to exact political obedience and its rights to govern. And should such a government refuse to abdicate its power, revolution against it is thoroughly justified. So, how did Mabini define revolution in his La Revolución Filipina? Yes, it is a violent means to regain the people's natural and inalienable rights. How? By overthrowing a government and substituting it by another, which is more in consonance with reason and justice. So, in the context of the Philippine Revolution, how are they going to regain that independence, the inalienable right of independence? Inalienable right of freedom. It is to fight for independence. For Mabini, it is the fundamental prerequisite to individual freedom and social and natural progress. Without independence, we cannot push or we cannot move towards progress because, again, essentially, it stifles the independence of the individual, and once the independence of the individual is being violated, everything follows. So, however, together with independence, each citizen had to be guided by reason and live a virtuous life to achieve the highest possible well-being of the Filipinos. It is in his El Verdadero Decalogo. Now, as Mabini suggested, to push for a revolution in order to regain what is essentially important in order to move towards progress, a revolution is necessary. However, maybe before he was sent to Guam, he only thought about the formation of a national community. He only thought about emancipation of the Filipino people. But in his writings in the ¿Cuál es la verdadera misión de la revolución? Mabini penned that he believed that the struggle of the Filipinos had great implications to its Malay neighbors. At the end of this essay, he said that the sole and final end of the revolution, of the Philippine Revolution, is to maintain alive and resplendent torch of liberty and civilization in Oceania, to illuminate the gloomy night in which the vilified and the degraded Malay race finds itself, in order that it may be led to the road of social emancipation. Mabini believed that the Malay neighbors would follow the lead of the Philippine Revolution. Well, we all know that we were the first to revolt against the European colonizers, or the colonizers for that matter, in the 19th century. And he said also that should the revolution succeed, its contagious character would create fear among the colonial powers. So therefore, hindi dapat matakot ang mga Pilipino to fight for its independence. Ang dapat matakot ay ang mga colonizers. Ang dapat matakot yung mga gustong sakupin ng bansa. Hindi dapat tayo. So, and in his essay as well, he used the word Malayos Filipinos. We are Malayos Filipinos, that we Filipinos are not alone. We belong to a wider group, the Malay race. And by saying that, having said that, Mabini having said that, in the end, Mabini foresaw that beyond independence, beyond regaining what is essentially important for us to move to progress, to development, we are not going to stop at the boundaries of the Philippines, but rather as a single entity of Malay people, we have to be, or we have to have, or there is a possible future cooperation among the Malay states. He said this in the 1900s, and eventually regional cooperation came into being after 1945, or even before 1945, after World War II. So it took less than 50 years after Mabini has spoken about a possible future cooperation among the Malay states. So, and finally, I think this is already my last slide on national independence and beyond. Mabini strongly believed, even if we have our own ills as a people, that we could govern ourselves. And we are ready to become part of a confederation of Asian states. So my last words for this particular discussion, in order to achieve progress, Mabini believed in the importance of individual freedom, to respect the inalienable right of the individual, and to respect the social contract, or to maintain the social contract between the individual and the government. And of course, we have to go beyond our national boundaries in order to achieve further progress. Maraming salamat at magandang umaga.
Yan po, maraming salamat po Ma'am April. Sa lahat po ng nanonood ngayon, kung may tanong po kayo, feel free to comment lang po your questions dito po sa live stream po. So now, ibinibigay ko na po ang floor para kay Miss Orizar para ibato yung mga tanong kay Dr. April Castro. Kapatid, meron ba tayong mga tanong dyan?
Yes. We're still waiting for the questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment on our FB Live.
Ayan, so dahil wala pa tayong nakukuhang mga tanong, pa-shoutout muna tayo. By the way, magandang umaga po. Pinabati ko po ngayon si Architect Raylita dahil birthday niya rin po ngayon sa araw ng kapanganakan ni Apolinario Mabini. So si Architect Rita po ay isa sa part ng secretariat, ang head po ng NQC Secretariat. Gayon din po kay Mr. Pablo Cabling, sabi niya, mabuhay ang alaala ni Mabini. Mabuhay ang Pilipinas. Maligayang kaarawan po, Apolinario Mabini. Gayon din kay Voltaire Zizek. Yan, binabati niya rin po si Apolinario Mabini. Kay Miss Gloria Melencio. Yan. Kay Ma'am Mary Irene Mendoza de Vera. Yan. Good morning po. From Catmon National High School, Bulacan. And kay Mr. Jojo Amper, yan, watching from Carmen, Cebu. Then kay Mr. Neil Botolano, yan, from Mandaluyong. So binabati ko rin po yung ating mga kasamahan sa iba't ibang museo ng National Historical Commission of the Philippines, as well as nagpapasalamat din po kami sa administration ng Museo El Deposito sa pag-aalaw sa atin na gamitin itong kanilang area for this webinar. So, Miss Jen, binabalik ko na po ulit sa'yo. Guys, may mga tanong po ba tayo?
For now, wala pa tayong questions, but I have a question for our speaker, Dr. Castro. Dr. Castro, I have a question about the government perspective. the governmental perspective of Apolinario Mabini. Before kasi, he was mentioned to be one of the pioneer in creating a law and order to be able to create a federalistic government. May questions na ako kasi nakalagay sa isa sa mga number one perspective niya is to let the government govern its people. No, narinig ba? And to take care of its people. And we all know that in Asia, Philippines also was very, very controversial when it comes to our government. Ang ask ko lang kong question is, do you think that if federalism will be applied in our country, do you think it will work?
Your question is federalism possible? For federalism is possible as a political what do you call this one, arrangement, okay, is possible for the country because Mabini has what was ano nga yan? But because Mabini has sponsored that kind of thought in his he outlined that kind of thought, okay, in the laws of the Republic before, okay. Well, it's a personal opinion, but I will not go on with my. I will not delve on my personal opinion, but rather, I'm just going to explain why Mabini had opted to sponsor a federalist kind of government. In my reading, it was not really federalism, but rather it was a necessity during that time because we don't have, according to Mabini, the right resources, arms, money, for that matter, in order to create a national entity. So, Mabini, what do you call this? Tried to pool the resources of the country by not inviting, but rather suggesting that the national government of Aguinaldo would call on the affluent families per region to donate their resources to the government as a seed in order to have, in order for the national government to move, in order for the national government to be able to implement its plans. So it was not a permanent measure, but rather it was a revolutionary measure that is needed at that time. That was how I understood the context of Mabini's. He didn't use the word federalism, but if you're going to read it, the mere fact that he wanted these affluent families to govern the regions and the provinces for that matter, parang maisip mo federalismo yata pwede kay Mabini. But no, it was a bomb necessary to buffer, okay, the needs of the time, I think. As of for the current situation, federalism, I do not.
It's too personal.
This is a personal answer. I don't like federalism. It has a lot of economic and political ramifications and repercussions to the national government as well as to the less, to the powerless, kumbaga. Federalism would only work for me if there is no great disparity, economically speaking, amongst our people. So it will push for a greater divide, more divide. So I do not want to sponsor federalism. I am not for federalism. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Castro, for that very big answer. We have another uh, participants here to online. His name is Harold Ian Kabuday Giwa, and gusto lang po niyang batiin ikaw from Katipunang Pangkasaysayan ng San Mateo Rizal. And we have a question from Leomar Evangelista Edranin. Sabi po niya, isinulat ni Neri John noong 2011 ang maaring connection ni Rizal, Mabini at ang secret society na Redemption de los Malayos o Redemption of the Malays. May bago na po bang pag-aaral tungkol dito? Galing po yan kay Leomar Evangelista Edrani.
Okay. The Redemption de los Malayos, okay, of Rizal. And then, yeah, we have to establish the fact that Mabini idolized Rizal. Most of it, actually, when you read La Revolución Filipina and his other writings, he always referred to Jose Rizal. Now, kung may pag-aaral ng Redemption de los Malayos, the redemption of the Malay race na panibago, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but in my limited knowledge, I have not encountered any new study about this organization, the Redemption de los Malayos of Rizal, as well as Mabini's, what do you call this? I don't know if he referred to Mabini as part of the Redemption de los Malayos, because the Redemption, the RDLM, was established in Spain. It is not in the Philippines, no? And it was established in the early years of Jose Rizal in Spain. So more or less, I don't know if there's a link between Rizal and Mabini for the Redemption de los Malayos, but what is clear here is that both intelligent, brilliant men believe that we belong to a greater Malay race. Thank you.
Thank you. We have another question from Chris De Jesus. He's from Quezon City University. Ang tanong po niya, yun po bang confederation or confederations of Asian states ay isang inspirasyong makikita sa formation ng ASEAN? Ano pong opinion dito? At salamat po.
What was the second question?
Second question is about the confederation of Asian states. Isa po daw po ba siyang inspiration na makikita sa formation or yung pagkakabuo ng ASEAN? Ano daw po yung opinion niyo dito? At maraming salamat daw po.
Okay. Hello, Chris from Quezon City University. Since the Philippines was the first to wave the flag of independence, or flag of independence, or the fight against the colonizers in the 19th century, a lot of our Asian neighbors looked up to the experience of the Filipino people. One manifestation of that are how our neighboring Malays used the word Rizal to name their children, their streets, as well as even shops in Malaysia. There's Rizal Barber Shop, etc., etc. So in that case, that is how they value our fight against the colonizers. But in case of the idea of Mabini into having a further cooperation among the Malay states, as it is the inspiration of the formation of the ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, I don't know if there's a direct link to that. Maybe they have read Mabini, but the Association of the Southeast Asian States came into being after a series of regional cooperations that failed, right? Like, for example, the Mafilindo, Malaysia, Philippines, and Indonesia. Before the ASEAN, we have this network between the three countries. And it happened, these regional cooperation groups, I think, came into being because, well, it's after 1945. It is, I forgot the real reason for this regional cooperation, the establishment of this regional cooperation, but it is a response to the world order after 1945. So ano bang nangyari noong 1945? At ano bang nangyari noong 1950s? ASEAN In 1950s na yan eh. Mafelindo, 1940 something. So ano bang nangyari? Balikan natin kung ano nangyari ng mga panahon na yan. There was the rise of communism, and in order to protect ourselves from being from the cloaks of communism, nagkaroon itong mga regional regional cooperation groups. However, kung ililink mo ito kay Mabini, I think there is no direct link. There's no direct link. Kaya in my lecture kanina, he foresaw that there will be a larger, a future cooperation between the Malay states, but linking it, a direct link between that statement and the creation of the ASEAN, medyo malayo. Kasi it has a response to a particular world order. Okay.
That answered the question of Peace De Jesus. Moving forward, before we go to our final 3 questions, meron pong nagpapahatid ng kanilang pagbati sa inyo, Dr. Castro, from the Philippine Historical Association, sa pangunguna ni Miss Gloria Melencio, if you know her. Shoutout po kay Miss Gloria Melencio at pinapabati po niya kayo ang buong Philippine Historical Association. We have another 3 questions here. This is the final question. This is from Josef Alec Geraldilla. This question is, how did Mabini reconcile his equals of freedom with, how did Mabini reconcile his ideals of freedom with the requirements of a revolutionary war? That's the first question. He said that one of his many criticisms leveled against the First Philippine Republic is its ill or unjust treatment of a number of people, including cultural minorities. Also, second question, how does Mabini imagine the Filipino people? Is there a recognition of the difference in cultural identities between our various ethnic groups?
The second question is kind of choppy. I was not able to get it, but I will address the first question and the third question first before you give me his second question. The first question is that how would you reconcile Mabini's idea of the individual freedom and the revolution? Well, a revolution is necessary, but to start with, a revolution is necessary in order to regain back the inalienable right of the individual for freedom. It means that the revolution would not happen if the government has secured the individual's right to freedom. Do you get my point? If the individual is free and can proceed towards progress, there's no need for a revolution. A revolution will only happen if that particular segment of society, the government, which ensures the freedom of the individual, is not doing its job. Then Mabini suggests that a revolution is justifiable. So that is the connection. A revolution is justifiable. The revolution is justifiable if it will what do you call this? If it will be a vehicle for the individual to regain its freedom by substituting that particular government with a just alternative that will ensure the individual's freedom. The third question was all about Mabini's concept of Malay and the native Filipinos, the indigenous Filipinos.
How does he imagine the Filipino people? From his own perspective, what is Filipino? Who is Filipino?
Okay. So, well, in my reading of Apolinario Mabini, the Filipino people are those people who are politically within the ambit of the national boundaries of the Philippines during that time. Politically are members of the Philippine society, those residing inside, those who were born in the Philippine archipelago, regardless of your region, regardless of your affiliation, etc., etc. Since Mabini is a political thinker, the only thing that I have read, he has not written about distinction between the peoples of the Philippines, but rather it's the peoples of the Philippines comprised of different indigenous groups. He has not alienated or distinguished this people as different, this indigenous group as different from the other indigenous group. Okay. Yeah, that's it. The second question, I was not able to get it.
The third question, actually, it's the three questions came from one person only. So we are going to read another two more questions from the participants. His third question is there any recognition of the difference in cultural identities between our various ethnic groups? Is there any cultural identities that varies our ethnic?
Oh, I'm sorry that I have not read anything in the writings of Mabini that tackles about the differences or cultural identities of the indigenous peoples, because I don't know, but his writings kasi, no, he was a prolific writer. He has a lot of letters, but those letters are highly political. And we have to understand that Mabini penned a lot of his thoughts during the revolution. And as the political thinker of the revolution, he did not have the luxury of time siguro to have this, to think about those concepts. Kasi the only, kumbaga, if you are going to study Mabini, his magnum opus is the La Revolución Filipina. Walang iba eh. It's the La Revolución Filipina. And in the La Revolución Filipina, in this book, na La Revolución, hawak ko talaga. In this book, na La Revolución Filipina, it's volumes 1 and 2, ang sinasabi lang niya dito ay the people. So, it's very up there. It's very cerebral. It's very political in nature. And because it's La Revolución Filipina, it talks about the revolution itself, the Philippine Revolution. Wala akong nabasa about those things. But I would like to believe that Apolinario Mabini is not someone who would discriminate, okay, the different groups of the Philippines. Because in any case, sabi naman niya, di ba, parang in the Malayness concept, he compared, parang makikita natin, culturally, we have affinity with other Malay states. Not, hindi yung this particular Filipino indigenous group, it has affinity to this indigenous group. No, the entire Filipino entity and its affinity to a larger Malay entity. Ganon yung nasa isip ni Mabini. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Castro. Well, I guess that the word that he used, the people, is a very serious word. Maybe he used that to describe all of the Filipinos or all of the people living in the Philippines at that time, or maybe during the pre-colonial Spanish era. Well, we have two more questions. This fourth questions came from Juan Francisco. Actually, this is very long. If Mabini lived longer, pwede kayong magkaroon ng reconciliation between him and Aguinaldo? Kasi alam naman natin yung issues between him and Aguinaldo. In his writings, he hated Aguinaldo and how he governed the Philippines. And maybe sa pagpupulong na naganap noon between Aguinaldo, Mascardo at ilang pang mga miyembro ng gabinete, bago namatay si General Antonio Luna, alam kaya ni Mabini kung sino nagpapatay kay Antonio Luna? Thank you, Doctor. That's from Juan Francisco.
Oh, nakakatuwa. Isa siyang, those questions are the questions na maririnig mo, makukuha mo sa classroom. Hypothetical. Kung buhay pa si Mabini, magkakasundo kaya sila ni Aguinaldo? Kaso hindi siya buhay eh. History kasi, we don't deal in hypotheses. As historians, parati kaming, kumbaga ang sangga lang namin ay facts. If it did not happen, we don't push ourselves to that arena. So, but for the sake of questions, sige, patulan natin, no? Para sa klase lang tayo, magkakasundo kaya sila. Sa palagay ko, masyadong malalim yung sugat kay Mabini. Tinanggal ang buong kabinete niya, 'di ba? Ni Aguinaldo. Buong kabinete. Hindi pa na tinanggal. Kumbaga, the entire Mabini cabinet resigned kumbaga, because of the differences. At hindi din and in the latter part of the revolution, hindi na siya pinakinggan ni Aguinaldo for reasons hindi natin alam. So if we are going to be parang sige, bigyan natin ng laman kung magkakasundo ba sila o hindi. If you have read Aguinaldo's Gunita ng Himagsikan, it was his diary, right? Parang eto na yung lahat, eto na yung sagot ko sa accusations na sublime paralytic sa kanyang La Revolucion Filipina. In the Gunita ng Himagsikan, walang plano si Aguinaldo na parang wala siyang plano na makipagkasundo. Kumbaga, he justified himself doon sa Gunita ng Himagsikan. Kumbaga, na ginawa niya ito dahil ganito. Ginawa niya ito dahil ganito. Di ba, one accusation of Apolinario Mabini to the government of Aguinaldo is that the violation against women, na wala siyang ginawa kahit na ang kanyang mga tauhan ay binabastos ang mga kababaihan. That was really a very accusation, but it was not addressed by Aguinaldo in his Gunita ng Himagsikan. I don't know. Was it addressed? When I read the Gunita ng Himagsikan years ago, the Gunita ng Himagsikan, I have not encountered an answer to that very fiery accusation of Apolinario Mabini sa violation ng mga kababaihan. Okay, yeah. So that is how I am going to address this question.
Thank you, Doctor. And the last questions came from Jojo Amper. His question is, how did Mabini philosophies influence Aguinaldo's government?
Mabini he provided the outline of Aguinaldo's government. He was the one who thought about how things are going to happen, the framework of the Aguinaldo government, how to win the war with less resources, how to avoid loss of lives, as much as possible, try to negotiate, yung mga tipong ganun. But in the end, because Aguinaldo has a lot of advisors, and in the process, he has a lot in his hands. The idealism of Mabini na set aside sa dulo. Yun. That was, I think it's written in La Revolucion Filipina na sinabi ni Mabini na, what was your greatest regret sa kanyang buhay or sa kanyang participation in the revolution while he was in Guam? Ang sabi niya, that I was not able to do, na hindi ko nagawa, or that I was not able to do much, kumbaga. Hindi niya, insiguro, pero hindi it's political. So, hindi lang si Mabini kasi yung kausap ni Aguinaldo, but the basics, the fundamentals of the Aguinaldo government, of the Malolos Constitution, the laws of the Philippine Republic, our relationship, our foreign relations during the time of Aguinaldo, lahat yon has the stamp of Mabini. Lahat yon.
Thank you, Dr. Castro. Is it okay if we just add another question? I think this is a very important question and everyone should know this on a national conference or webinar. Is it okay? All right. So this question came from Januel Rontos. He said, good morning, Dr. Castro. Did Mabini try to connect with neighboring Malay people for the possible realization of his ideas? For the possible realization of his idea of a confederate among Malay people. Are there any traces of attempts, especially during the struggle for Philippine independence?
Okay. Yes, hello. I think that was my former student. General Rontos. Okay. Anyhow, did he do Ayada? Yeah. Did he tried to establish connection with the Malay states, the surrounding neighbor Malay states? He dreamt of a possible cooperation between and among the Malay states, but him establishing connection with the Malay states, I think he was not able to do it. I think lang ha, kasi wanda ako nabasa. I think he was not able to do it because he was preoccupied in dealing with the Americans, negotiating with the Americans as Foreign Affairs Secretary by that time, dealing with the Americans, negotiating with the Americans about about the events or the happenings in the Philippines, the government of Aguinaldo and the American government in the Philippines. So, and I I think hindi niya ito nagawa, but it is in his mind. It is in his mind that in the future we cannot evade the possibility of a future cooperation with our Malay neighbors. But Mabini was not able to do that. He died early, diba? Mga 19 ano siya namatay when he was exiled to Guam, tapos nabalik sa Pilipinas, and then he encountered cholera, and months after he encountered cholera, he died. So yun. Sorry, hindi ko alam kung nagawa niya, pero feeling ko wala siyang time.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Iber Castro, for your wonderful talk and for entertaining the questions of our viewers. To our viewers who would like to question or to send more questions to our speaker for today, kindly send us a message at the National Quincentennial Commission FB page. This is the time where we are going to end our open forum, and as much as we'd like to entertain more questions, I'm afraid that we have to pass it now to the host of this program. Thank you so much, Dr. Castro, for answering their questions. I'd like to pass this moment to our hosts, Ms. Jubilin Yerves and Ms. Ayesha Saiseng.
Okay, hello po. Again, thank you, Prof. Castro, for a very comprehensive lecture about Mabini and the Malay freedom. Actually, isa sa mga tumatak sa akin sa lecture na to na sabi nga ni Mabini, dapat nating ipaglaban ang ating kalayaan bilang bahagi ng isang Malay entity. Kung kailangan ng revolusyon, dapat nating itong i-push kasi sa pamamagitan nito, matatakot yung mga colonizers, yung mga mananakop na sakupin pa yung ibang mga bayan. So, sa pamamagitan ng revolusyon na to, halimbawa ang Pilipinas, kumbaga maging modelo tayo ng ibang karatig bansa natin na bahagi din ng Malayo entity like Indonesia or iba pang Southeast Asian groups. At ito nga po, ang next lecture natin will be on July 28, 2020. Yan. Next week na po to tungkol sa theorizing the Visayan food Magellan possibly it. So antabayanan po natin ang announcement sa darating na mga araw na to. At bilang panghuling pananalita, akin pong iiwan ang quotation na ito mula kay Mabini. So, without a doubt, we have to be the best that we can be, the very best. The name Filipino will be a title of honor, ennobling whomsoever possesses it. May we find out how to win it. So, dito na po nagtatapos ang ating webinar sa umagang ito. Muli, maraming salamat sa lahat. Kay Ms. Orizar, kay Dr. Castro, at sa lahat po ng bumubuo ng Museo ni Apolinario Mabini-PUP, Museo ni Apolinario Mabini-Tanauan, and sa NHCP and NQC. Magandang umaga po sa lahat.
Ang pangalang Pilipino ay dapat na maging isang titulong napakadakila sa sino mang may taglay nito. Sa mga salitang ito, dinakila ni Apolinario Mabini ang pangalang Pilipino. Ipinanganak si Apolinario Mabini sa Tanauan, Batangas noong ika-23 ng Hulyo, taong 1864. Siya ay lumaki sa pamilyang magbubukid. Namulat naman siya sa halaga ng edukasyon dahil sa kanyang lolo na isang guro. Sa kabila ng kahirapan, sinikap ng kanyang pamilya na siya'y makapag-aral. Nang tumungtong sa universidad, kumuha siya ng kurso sa pagtuturo at abogasya. Upang matustusan naman ang edukasyon, kinailangan niya magtrabaho kasabay ng pag-aaral. Sa kabila ng kahirapan, nagtapos at nagkalisensya sa abogasya si Mabini at nakilala sa larangang ito. Ang mas nakakamangha sa kanya ay ang paglalaan niya ng panahon para sumama sa mga pagkilos bilang isang lider kabataan. Naging aktibo siya sa pagkilos laban sa pang-aabuso ng pamahalaang Espanyol at ng mga praile. Unti-unti niyang naintindihan ang mga problema sa lipunan. Dito, kumidlap ang pagkamakabayan ni Mabini. Ngunit may mga kasamahan si Mabini na ninais na tuluyang wakasan ang pang-aalipin sa bayan sa pamamagitan ng paghihimagsik. Sa pagsiklab ng revolusyon, marami ang ikinulong, pinahirapan, ipinatapon, at binitay sa paratang na sila ang inspirasyon sa paglaban sa Espanya. Kabilang dito si Mabini na ipiniit sa ospital ng San Juan de Dios dahilan sa kanyang sakit na polio. Nang makalaya matapos magpetisyon dahil sa sakit at pagiging inosente, lumawak ang pangunawa ni Mabini sa diwa ng himagsikan. Naging inspirasyon niya ang mga martir na nag-alay ng kanilang buhay para labanan ang kawalan ng katarungan at pang-aapi. Ito ang naging hudyat sa pagsapi niya sa revolusyon. Sinikap niyang gabayan ito gamit ang kanyang kaalaman sa batas at filosofiya. Sa pagkupkup sa kanya ng mga revolusyonaryo, naisulat niya ang El Verdadero Decalogo na naglalayong ikintal sa bawat Pilipino ang damdamin at kaisipang pangmakabayan. Nagawa niya ito sa kabila ng patuloy na paglala ng kanyang karamdaman. Muling humarap ang bayan sa panibagong banta ng pananakop ng matalo ng mga Amerikano sa labanan sa look ng Maynila, ang mga Espanyol. Nagbitiw ng babala si Mabini sa mga revolusyonaryo na mag-ingat sa mga layong ito. Umalab ang himagsikan laban sa mga Espanyol sa pamumuno ni General Emilio Aguinaldo. Inatasan niya si Mabini bilang kanyang katuwang at tagapayo sa himagsikan. Si Mabini ang bumalangkas sa sistema ng gobyerno at naglatag ng mga programa ng Batang Republika sa Asya. Nang sumiklab ang digmaang Pilipino-Amerikano, sinikap ni Mabini na ikintal sa isip ng bawat Pilipino ang diwa ng sinimulang laban para sa kalayaan. Dahil sa takot ng mga Amerikano sa lakas ng kanyang impluwensya sa kilusang revolusyonaryo, siya'y ipinatapon sa Guam at pinilit na manumpa ng katapatan sa Estados Unidos. Di naglaon, tinanggap niya ang alok na amnestiya sa kagustuhang makabalik sa Pilipinas. Patuloy niyang tinanggihan ang mga alok na posisyon ng mga Amerikano at sa halip ay pinilit na makapagsulat ng mga artikulo. Ngunit dahil sa paglubha ng karamdaman, ay di niya na ito nagawa. Ilang buwan lamang mula nang makabalik, sa edad na 39, ay pumanaw si Mabini sa sakit na kolera. Marami ang nakakakilala sa kanya sa bansag na ang dakilang lumpo at utak ng rebolusyon. Ngunit higit pa rito ang naging saysay ng mga ipinakita niyang paraan ng pagmamahal sa bayan, ang maghandog ng kung anong mayroon, maglingkod hanggang sa makakaya, at kumilos para sa ikadadakila ng bayan ng walang kapalit. Inalay ni Mabini ang kanyang buhay na naniniwalang dapat isapuso ng sinumang naghahangad ng tunay na kalayaan ang diwa nito at kung bakit ito ipinaglalaban. Sa ganoong paraan ay nagsilbi siyang tanglaw na gumabay at nanghimok sa mga Pilipino na lumaban para sa kalayaan.